You think you know betrayal until it looks you in the eye from across the dinner table, smiling like nothing ever happened. It was my birthday, the happiest day of the year. Or so it was supposed to be. I'd just been promoted. My wife was radiant in her black dress, and my friends filled the room with laughter. Then I opened the box she handed me. What I found inside changed everything. My life, my marriage, and how far I was willing to go for revenge. The soft hum of conversations filled the air as the lights of the restaurant dimmed to a warm amber glow. It was my 40th birthday, and my wife, Claire, had planned a celebration fit for the milestone. Our closest friends and colleagues filled the private dining room, their laughter and toasts weaving a tapestry of cheer that felt almost surreal. Claire, radiant as always, leaned into me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Are you happy?" she whispered. I nodded, though something in her gaze gave me pause. It was subtle, a flicker of something unreadable before her usual warm smile returned. "Happier than ever," I replied, masking the unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Claire had always been the anchor in my life. She'd stood by me through the rocky early days of founding Aurora, the AI-driven tech company that had become one of Silicon Valley's crown jewels. But lately, something felt off. My best friend and COO, Jason, raised his glass for yet another toast. To Ben, the man who turned a crazy idea into a billion-dollar empire. Here's to another 40 years of success. The room erupted into cheers, but as I scanned the faces, I caught Jason exchanging a glance with Claire. A fleeting connection, quickly masked, but enough to send a chill down my spine. Later that night, after the guests had left, Claire handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. "I wanted you to open this when it's just us," she said, her voice soft. Inside was a gold pin, engraved with my initials and the phrase, "To the next chapter." It was thoughtful, intimate, everything I would have expected from her. But something about it felt like a curtain being drawn over something much darker. "I thought you'd like it," she said, watching me carefully. "It's perfect," I replied, forcing a smile. As Claire kissed me goodnight and went to bed, I lingered in the living room, the pin heavy in my hand. That glance between her and Jason replayed in my mind, an unwelcome intruder in the narrative of my otherwise perfect evening. The next morning, I sat at my desk in Aurora's headquarters, reviewing our latest financial reports. Jason strode in, his usual confidence radiating as he dropped a file onto my desk. "Morning, boss," he said with a grin. "Thought you'd want to see the updated projections." I glanced over the numbers. They were excellent, as always, but my focus shifted to Jason himself. For years, he'd been my right hand, the person I trusted most. But now, I couldn't ignore the unease that had taken root. "Look solid," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Anything I should be concerned about?" Jason shrugged. "Not unless you count being too successful as a problem." He laughed, but I didn't join him. That afternoon, my assistant, Emily, brought me a stack of documents for review. Among them was an internal memo Jason had signed off on, a strategic partnership with a lesser-known firm, Apex Systems. "What's this about?" I asked, holding up the document. Emily hesitated. "It's something Jason's been pushing for. He said it's a small play, not worth bringing to your desk." I frowned. Jason rarely made decisions without running them by me. "Get me everything you can on Apex Systems," I said. Later that evening, Emily handed me a folder filled with printouts. Apex Systems was a shell company, its ownership buried under layers of anonymous LLCs. But one name stood out, Rachel Greer, a former employee of Aurora who'd left under contentious circumstances. The pieces didn't add up. Why would Jason align us with a shady outfit linked to someone with a grudge against the company? I decided to confront him directly. The next morning, I found Jason in the break room, casually chatting with a few employees. As they dispersed, I approached him. "Jason, we need to talk about Apex Systems," I said, my tone firm. He raised an eyebrow, his casual demeanor unshaken. "What about it?" "I'm not comfortable with the lack of transparency," I said. "We don't do business with companies we can't vet." Jason's smile faltered. "Ben, it's a small partnership, barely a blip on our radar. Trust me, it's fine." But I didn't trust him, not anymore. That night, I went home to find Claire waiting for me, dinner already set on the table. Her effort to recreate a normal evening felt rehearsed, as though she were trying to steer me away from the storm brewing beneath the surface. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light. "Complicated," I replied, watching her reaction. Claire's smile didn't waver, but there was a slight tension in her posture, a hint of something unsaid. After dinner, I went to my study and closed the door. Pulling out my laptop, I began digging deeper into Apex systems. The more I uncovered, the more alarmed I became. Transactions linked to Jason's accounts, unexplainable spikes in revenue for Apex, and, most chillingly, Claire's name appearing on a client list. I felt my pulse quicken. Why would Claire have any connection to this? I didn't sleep that night, my mind spinning with questions. The following day, I called Sophie, an old friend and cybersecurity expert who had helped me during Aurora's early days. "I need your help," I said, explaining everything. Sophie didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you've got. If someone's playing games, we'll find out." Within days, Sophie uncovered more than I could have imagined. Apex Systems wasn't just a shell company. It was a front for a larger operation siphoning data from Aurora. And the key players? Jason and Claire. Sophie sent me an encrypted file with recordings of conversations between Jason and an unknown third party. Their plan was laid bare: destabilize Aurora, transfer its proprietary tech to Apex, and force me out as CEO. I felt my chest tighten. Claire wasn't just complicit, she was actively involved. The next time Jason walked into my office, I was ready. I didn't confront him outright. Instead, I played along, acting as though nothing was amiss. "Let's keep pushing on that partnership with Apex," I said, feigning interest. Jason's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You got it, boss." But inside, I was already planning how to dismantle their scheme piece by piece. Claire was harder to face. That evening, as she sat on the couch reading, I watched her, searching for a trace of the woman I thought I knew. "Is everything okay?" she asked, looking up. I forced a smile. Of course. But I knew the storm was only beginning. The air felt heavier with each passing day, though neither Jason nor Claire seemed to notice my growing distance. Or perhaps they noticed and didn't care, confident that their plans were already too far along for me to stop. Sophie continued to dig deeper into Apex Systems and its network, her findings illuminating just how elaborate Jason and Claire's scheme truly was. Apex wasn't merely siphoning data. It was selling Aurora's most advanced proprietary algorithms to a foreign tech conglomerate under the guise of consulting agreements. "It's worse than we thought," Sophie said one evening over a secure call. "If this continues, they won't just force you out. They'll cripple Aurora entirely. And you could end up liable for the fallout." The gravity of her words hit me like a hammer. Aurora wasn't just my company. It was a part of me. Watching it collapse under someone else's greed was unthinkable. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "We need a smoking gun," she said. "Something that ties Jason and Claire directly to the theft. Until then, this is all circumstantial." I knew exactly where to look. That night, I waited until Claire had gone to bed, her even breathing confirming that she was asleep. Quietly, I slipped into her office and powered on her laptop. Her password hadn't changed, an oversight that felt almost insulting. As I searched through her files, I found emails and contracts linking Claire to Apex Systems. But it was the calendar entry that caught my attention. Dinner with Apex, confidential, scheduled for the following evening. The meeting wasn't with Jason, as I'd expected, but with a name Sophie had flagged in her research: Richard Langley, the CEO of Apex Systems. Sophie's voice echoed in my mind. "We need a smoking gun." I took a deep breath, closed Claire's laptop, and began to formulate a plan. The next evening, I followed Claire to the restaurant where her confidential dinner was taking place. I stayed out of sight, seated at a small table near the back, my hoodie pulled up to obscure my face. She arrived on time, her smile warm and inviting as she greeted Langley. The sight of her laughing and chatting as though she hadn't betrayed me was a strange kind of torture. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. Sophie had equipped me with a discreet recording device that I'd hidden in Claire's car earlier that day. An hour later, I watched as she and Langley left, parting ways in the parking lot. My chest tightened as she returned to her car, completely unaware of the trap I'd set. The next morning, Sophie called, her voice tense with urgency. "Ben, we've got it," she said. The recording was clean. Langley spelled out everything. How Jason and Claire orchestrated the leaks, how they planned to oust you, and even their backup plan to dismantle Aurora if things go south. I leaned back in my chair, a mixture of relief and fury coursing through me. "What's the play?" "We take this to the board," Sophie said. "They need to see who they're dealing with before Jason makes his move." I nodded, though I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. Claire's betrayal wasn't just a professional blow. It was deeply personal. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week, but I knew Jason wouldn't wait that long. Sure enough, 2 days later, he called for an emergency session, citing concerns about leadership and company direction. When I walked into the boardroom, Jason was already there, flanked by several members of the board. His expression was one of barely concealed triumph. "Ben," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Thanks for joining us on such short notice." "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Jason smiled, a predator sensing blood. "We've been reviewing recent developments, and it's become clear that Aurora needs a change in leadership. For the good of the company, of course." The board murmured in agreement, their unease palpable. Before Jason could continue, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "I thought you might say that," I said, my voice calm. "So I brought something I think you'll find interesting." I distributed the documents, Sophie's compilation of evidence tying Jason to Apex Systems, along with a transcript of the recording from Claire's car. The room fell silent as the board members read, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage. "This is absurd," Jason said, his confidence faltering. "You can't seriously believe—" "Save it," I interrupted. "The evidence speaks for itself." One of the board members, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, turned to Jason. "Is this true?" Jason's jaw tightened, his usual charisma failing him for once. "It's not as black and white as it looks," he said, his voice strained. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Black and white enough for the SEC, I imagine." Jason was escorted out of the building later that day, his protests echoing down the halls. But while his departure felt like a victory, the war was far from over. That evening, I confronted Claire. She was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine, as though nothing had changed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharp. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" I threw the recording onto the counter. "This. Care to explain?" Claire's face paled, but she quickly recovered. "It's not what you think," she said. "It's exactly what I think," I said. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." Her composure cracked, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Ben, I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," I said, "and you made yours." She set her glass down, her hands trembling. "You don't understand. Langley threatened me. If I didn't help him, he said he'd ruin us both." Her words hung in the air, a tangled mix of truth and lies. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked, my voice breaking. Claire looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You nearly destroyed everything I built. Everything we built." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Just don't." That night, I sat alone in my study, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Claire's tears might have been genuine, but they couldn't erase what she'd done. The fight wasn't over. Langley was still out there, and Aurora's future hung in the balance. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. With Sophie by my side and the truth on my side, I would finish this, no matter the cost. The days that followed were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Jason's sudden ousting sent ripples through the company, and while I'd managed to keep the board from panicking, the threat of Langley and Apex Systems loomed larger than ever. Sophie worked tirelessly, combing through the fallout to ensure we hadn't missed any vulnerabilities. "Langley's not the kind of man who folds easily," she warned during one of our late-night calls. "He'll strike back, and it'll be bigger than anything we've seen so far." I wasn't about to let him. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. Late one evening, Sophie called with an urgent update. "They're moving faster than I thought," she said. "Apex just filed for an injunction to freeze Aurora's assets, claiming breach of proprietary technology. If they succeed, it'll cripple us before we can recover." My stomach turned. "How much time do we have?" 2 days, Sophie said. "Maybe less." We both knew what this meant. Langley wasn't just trying to dismantle Aurora. He was trying to erase it. "We need leverage," I said. "Something so damning they won't dare show their faces in court." "There's one more angle we haven't explored," Sophie said hesitantly. "Claire." That night, I confronted Claire again, this time with a sense of finality. She was in her study, surrounded by papers she hadn't bothered to hide. Documents linking her to Apex, her contracts with Langley, and notes that hinted at just how deeply she'd been involved. "Do you even feel guilty?" I asked, holding up one of the contracts. Claire looked up, her eyes tired but defiant. "I've already told you, Ben. I did what I had to do." "No," I said, my voice rising. "You did what you wanted to do. You sided with Langley because it benefited you. Don't pretend this was about anything else." She sighed, setting her pen down. "You think it's that simple? You think I enjoyed this? Then prove it," I said. "Help me take him down." Her laughter was bitter. "And why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, everything falls apart," I said. "Not just Aurora. Everything you've built with Langley. Everything you think you'll have when this is over. Do you really think he won't cut you loose the second you're no longer useful?" Claire hesitated, her composure cracking. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The next day, Sophie and I worked with Claire to set a trap for Langley. It was a risky plan, relying on Claire's ability to convince him she was still loyal while feeding him just enough misinformation to lure him into the open. "He won't trust me completely," she warned. "Not after everything that's happened." "That's why we'll make it convincing," I said. "You'll tell him Jason has evidence against him and that he's willing to trade it for immunity." "And when he takes the bait?" she asked. "We record everything," Sophie said. "Enough to dismantle his operation for good." Langley agreed to meet Claire at a private jet hangar on the outskirts of the city. The location was remote, chosen specifically to minimize the risk of being overheard. Sophie and I arrived early, setting up surveillance equipment in a nearby van. Claire was wired with a hidden microphone, her every move and word being transmitted to us in real time. As Langley's sleek black car pulled into the hangar, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment we'd been building toward. Claire stepped out to meet him, her body language confident despite the tension in her voice. "You didn't have to come in person," she said as he approached. "I like to handle these things myself," Langley replied smoothly. "Where's Jason?" "Not far," Claire said. "But he won't show himself until he has assurances. Immunity, full protection from prosecution. He won't hand over the files otherwise." Langley's smile was cold. "And you trust him?" "Of course not," Claire said. "But he's desperate. And desperate people are predictable." Langley seemed to consider this, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You've been less predictable lately, Claire. I've heard rumors that you're not as committed as you used to be." Claire's laugh was convincing, even to me. "Rumors are dangerous, Richard, and they're almost always wrong." Langley nodded, though his suspicion didn't waver. "Let's make this quick. Where's the proof?" Claire hesitated, just long enough to make him impatient. "It's in a secure location, but I need to know we have a deal first." As Langley leaned closer, I saw Sophie's fingers fly across her keyboard, isolating the signal from his phone. Within seconds, she'd hacked into his encrypted files, downloading everything we needed to expose him. But just as the transfer completed, Langley's demeanor shifted. He pulled a gun from his coat, pointing it directly at Claire. "I think you've been playing me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. My heart pounded as I watched the scene unfold. "We have to do something," I said, reaching for the van's door handle. "Wait," Sophie said, her voice steady. "She knows what she's doing." To my shock, Claire didn't flinch. "If you're going to shoot me, do it," she said calmly. "But then you'll never find Jason, or the files. And without those, You'll be the one left holding the bag when this all falls apart. Langley hesitated, his grip on the gun faltering. You're bluffing. Am I? Claire asked, her gaze unyielding. After a tense moment, Langley lowered the gun, his frustration palpable. Fine, but if you cross me again, you'll do what? Claire interrupted. Lose everything? You need me, Richard. Remember that. As Langley left the hangar, Sophie and I sprang into action. By the time he realized the files on his phone had been compromised, it was too late. Law enforcement descended on Apex Systems within hours, armed with enough evidence to dismantle the entire operation. Langley was arrested, his empire crumbling around him. Jason, desperate to save himself, cooperated with authorities, providing further proof of their crimes. And Claire? I confronted her one last time, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. You played him perfectly, I said, but I can't ignore what you did to me. To us. Claire's expression was unreadable. I never stopped loving you, Ben. I lost my way. I hope you find it again, I said, but not with me. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked out the door without another word. Aurora survived, but I was forever changed. The betrayals had left scars, but they also taught me the value of resilience and the importance of surrounding myself with people I could truly trust. Sophie became my closest confidant, and together, we rebuilt Aurora stronger than ever. The battle was over, but the lessons would stay with me for a lifetime. And as I looked out over the city from my office, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, I was ready.